My name is Sam Stolper. I'm an assistant professor here at U of M in the School for Environment and Sustainability. Thanks, Kate, for chairing this session, and Lang and Ben for presenting your research, and to all you guys for coming here yesterday and today, participating and listening. We just got a history lesson in passenger travel in the United States in the 21st century. A couple drops relative to either expectations or maybe previous trends in key outcomes that we're interested in. From Lang, we learned that average time use for travel per person dropped significantly between 2003 and 2017, maybe a bit of a plateau starting in 2010, but the net change is a drop. And that's overall. It's also in most activity categories and in most, if not all, age groups. From Ben, we learned, or maybe some of you already had known, that in the mid-2000s or late 2000s, we had this leveling off of VMT overall in the US, and that's following on 3 decades or more of pretty steady growth in VMT. And also from Ben and his co-authors, we have this potential explanation for that leveling off. Demographic and economic characteristics, as opposed to changes in driving habits conditional on that type, conditional on those characteristics. That begs the question, okay, we're looking at history, we're getting these history lessons, what can we draw from those? I think what we're all after is trying to plan for, adapt in the face of the future with very significant changes to transportation. And so the first question in my mind that this research in this session begs is, will VMT rise going forward or fall, and by how much? Both Lang and Ben provide in their submissions to this conference projections based on their data and models on the future of time use on travel and VMT overall. Lang didn't speak directly to that in her presentation, so I won't refer to that here. But Ben did. Ben's work with his co-authors suggests, gives a prediction of 0.9% annual growth in VMT through 2025. And if I'm understanding the underlying story correctly, that is driven largely by changes in income and the number of workers per household, and also population, or the number of households overall, over the longer run. We had this blip in VMT in the mid to late 2000s, and that's from those variables as well. But when we extrapolate linearly from the longer term trend in those 3 variables, we get a prediction of a rise continuing out into the short, or as Ben said, medium run into 2025. I find that plausible and compelling and credible. It's a short run estimate, and so what I really want out of this is to think longer term, given these very non-marginal changes to transportation that we're about to see, whether it's in the next 10 years, out to 2025, 2028, or beyond. Ben talked about a couple sort of bins of explanations, changes in economic and demographic characteristics versus changes in driving habits, conditional on that type. I would prefer, at least for the longer run, to think more fundamentally, to really zoom in or step back, depending on how you want to visualize this, at the decision at the individual level or the household level of VMT. That's where the decisions are being made, and then we aggregate those up to the nation level to get a total VMT, for instance. And some of the stuff that's been mentioned, gas prices and income, these are fundamental, these are structural determinants of the choice of VMT at the household or individual level. There are others that matter as well. Fuel economy, which of course also has a price. Wealth or income we've talked about, and that will always be fundamental. I think it's important to differentiate between 2 sort of sub-channels of wealth. One is that you have more income, you are more able to or willing to pay for more gasoline, but also your opportunity cost of time is likely to go up. And we've been talking about this value of time the last couple days. I think that's important here. And if your opportunity cost of time goes up, that might actually push down your driving. The income elasticity of demand for VMT is still positive. So the net is a rise in VMT with wealth, likely, in most parts of the distribution. Thirdly, the utility of driving, and not to mention all of the other goods that a household is optimizing over or choosing from. Okay? That includes safety, that includes the in-vehicle experience, and that also includes the goods and services that are accessed through travel. Okay? This is helpful to me, at least, because when I think about what's coming down the pipeline, it's, as I said, very non-marginal changes to all those fundamental foundational parameters that affect the choice of VMT. I am not an expert in the various technology changes, changes to, that are all highlighted on these slides. Marianne Codd, I think, did a great job yesterday touching on most, if not all of these. And for further reference, definitely check out the Wadud, McKenzie, Levy paper that I'm citing right here. Paul Levy may, in fact, be here today. And also a review piece on automation and the environment from just a couple months ago by Morteza Taibat, who's here, and co-authors. Those are great places to look for this. But briefly, I've categorized all these changes myself, the idea being that number one is these changes to the way cars are being driven, vehicles are being driven. Number two being changes to the vehicles themselves and occupancy of those vehicles. Number three being changes to safety and the follow-on changes in highway speeds. And number four being that in-vehicle experience. All of these, or most of, if not all of these, are going to change significantly, and so it stands to reason that VMT is going to change as well. At a certain point, the proxies, not income, income's fundamental, but the proxies, the socioeconomic and demographic characteristics that we use to build predictive models based on historical data, at some point they cease to be useful in making these predictions into the longer run. So we need to understand how these things are changing and how that, how behavior responds to those. That, of course, feeds into the big question, which is what are the energy use impacts? You know, pick your externality poison. We have not talked so much about energy security, but we have talked some about local air pollution, global climate change, congestion was featured heavily earlier today, safety, road quality, if you live in Michigan, that's top of mind. All of these things, the outcomes in these realms, the magnitude of the external cost really hinges on getting energy use impacts right. And to be a little bit repetitious, we have these two levers. That's how I am thinking about this question, about net energy use as a result of changes in VMT and fuel economy. On the one hand, some of those channels in the last slide, changes to the way we drive and the vehicle right sizing and ride efficiency, this will improve fuel economy. Massive potential, seemingly, in my relatively non-expert perspective here, massive potential for improvements in fuel economy. But on the flip side, we have this other lever of induced travel demand. And we've long known, there's a long literature on the rebound effect, energy efficiency rising, fuel economy rising, and so the price of VMT, the fuel price of VMT goes down. That's an incentive to drive more. The literature has a lot of different estimates on the size of this impact, this rebound effect. It's not zero. Okay? Something we know less about, a lot less about, I think, is the induced travel demand that will occur from reductions in the opportunity cost of travel, the time cost of travel. Okay? This one is pretty scary to me. And we know, we have some estimates of that time price elasticity of demand for VMT, but we need to do a lot more here. That's what I'm trying to work on with Morteza and Ming Zhu, who's a colleague of ours at the School for Environment. The key parameter, or parameters, is either the combined elasticity of VMT with respect to the full price, right? Not just fuel, but time. Or we could separate those out, especially if there's a behavioral difference in the response to those two costs. But that's the key parameter in understanding how VMT, how much induced travel demand there is going to be. And just to sort of put a bow on this with a little lived experience, a data point of n equals 1, I live in Detroit. I commute to work a few times a week to Ann Arbor, and I work from home the rest of the time. And for me personally, the marginal, the binding constraint here on what determines how much I go to work and how much VMT I choose is not the fuel cost, it's the time cost. If you give me access to automated vehicle technology, I think without question I will end up driving more. And if I think about if I introspect about how many more trips I will take, and I think about how many people this story applies to, it starts to seem like the induced travel demand will be quite large. I'll stop there. Thank you very much.